All right, so now we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and then I'm going to give you the instructions for what you're going to be working on tonight and the rest of this week. And if you did not do the work from last week, try to go and do that before you start this, because it will build on each other. Or you can be working on them simultaneously. But if you don't have any events to write about for lesson 2, you'll need to go and create that timeline, even if it's just a brief timeline and is not exhaustive. You'll need that timeline in order to do what you're being asked to do this week. So page 29 is the digging deeper section of this chapter. And what the point of this is really to just think through this in a little bit different way. It says, taking time to remember and record the people, places, and experiences in your life helps you to see that your life is made up of stories that testify to who God is and his presence on earth. So sometimes we're not always given opportunities to share our whole testimony, but we could always be looking for opportunities to share snapshots of our testimony. So breaking your story down into what we're going to call little segments today is one way for you to start to see how you could more frequently just share little snapshots of your testimony, either at work, at the gym, with your grandkids, whatever it might look like. And if you can thematically organize them when you're listening to maybe a struggle that someone else has, or a doubt that they're struggling with, you can recall that you've already put the parts of your story into this sort of theme and pull out the one part of your story that connects with what that person needs to hear. So that's kind of the goal of this. And again, the biblical tieback is just that these are our stones that we're setting up for the next generation to hear and see who God is. So if this is so important, and if our story is our own and we really are the only ones who know it, why do we then struggle with sharing our story? And the bottom of page 29 gives you 3 reasons why I think it's sometimes hard to share your story. Sometimes it's just that we don't take enough time to reflect on the people, places, and experiences God has given us that point to who he is. Sometimes we just run day to day and we don't stop and see what God is doing or has done in order to be able to have it on the tip of our tongue to share with people as they are a part of our lives. Another one is you might just feel like you're not a very good storyteller, or you don't understand narrative, or you just aren't used to it. And like many things, sharing your testimony, sharing your story, writing things down, they really do become more easily done when you practice. It's a skill. So communications and riding your bike are both skills, and we can all become better at them, but we don't need to be the same at them. So part of it is just getting yourself over maybe a doubt or a lie you're believing that you don't know how to communicate your story well. And the Spirit can give you the strength to do that, and also the permission to share in the way that you need to share. And we're going to talk about personality types later, and that will help you understand what situations you probably feel most comfortable being in and sharing who you are in. And maybe that's part of what's holding you up, is you don't understand your own way of connecting with people. And once you can understand that, maybe it'll help you share your story a little bit more easily. And then the third is that we often aren't in the habit of sharing God's handiwork with others. It's not super common, I don't think, in a lot of realms for us to really take the time to ask each other, what's God showing you right now, or what about your life really speaks to who God is. Sometimes it's just a little bit hard to get below the surface level questions and really talk to each other about our narrative, about our story, about our testimony. And so we are going to try and make it more normal and make it more common for us to be talking about who God is and what he's done in our life on a more daily basis. And I'm hoping the tool from this lesson can help you do that a little bit more. So if you want to turn to page 30, there is a description there of the tool that we are working on this week. And this tool is called thematic labeling of stones. So you already have your stones. And what you're going to do is you're going to use some highlighters to try and categorize certain parts of your story to help you better point out or see for yourself what God was doing in your life at that time. So you can just follow along with me on kind of the descriptor of this tool, and then I'll walk you through what it looks like to use it. I will warn you, it looks more complicated than it is, and it really is part of a tool that we use when we're analyzing literature or when I'm teaching students how to write their story. So this is where a lot of this comes from, and it just takes some practice. So don't let the diagrams and the descriptions scare you. Once you get used to it and once you understand the concept, it is fairly easy to start applying it and using your highlighters and different things to kind of put things in an order. And I really do promise that you will look at your own story very differently, and you'll tell your own story very differently when you're able to kind of see the way that that your testimony is one of the best stories that you will ever know, that you will ever write, that you will ever tell. Because it's God's story and He's writing it, and we're just looking at what is He doing in our story to point us to the next part of our story. So thematic labeling, you can look right below where it says tool number 2. It says giving a thematic organizational structure to the events of your life. The Bible sets up for us a storyline pattern that is used in nearly every book or movie that leaves the reader feeling satisfied at the end. So I don't know if you noticed this or if you know this, every good story follows the same pattern. It is also the pattern that we see in the Bible, the greatest author of all. So, did you know that all good stories have these necessary components? They must have characters, it must have an exposition, it must have rising action, it must have conflict, and then it must have a turning point and a resolution. So, in literary analysis, scholars call this the plot line, if you've ever heard that before. And it's just a way that you either analyze stories or write your own stories, but you follow this pattern. And below you'll see that on the bottom of 30, the original plot line of a good story also runs directly through the Bible. So, and that it starts in the Bible and it continues and keeps going in circles for all of our lives. So no matter the testimony you have, it is a good story because it has these components, and that's the components we're going to be categorizing and looking for on your plot line. So at the very bottom of page 30, it says, note the correlation between the elements of the plot line and the gospel story of the Bible as described below. So you have essential parts of the story, and then you have the gospel portion in bold. So every story must have an exposition and a rising action. So exposition means it has a setting, a location, and a time. It has a place where this story takes place. That's exposition. And then rising action are the events that lead up to the climax. So for us, that was creation. So creation set us humans in a time and a space on earth. That's exposition. And anything that led up to what happened next, that's the rising action. So there was kind of a quick progress here in our story as far as what's told in Genesis. So you have creation, and then the next thing that happens is the conflict. So what was the main conflict that has been affecting all of us since beginning of, well, not quite the beginning of time, but since Eve, was the fall. So in our story, we have creation, and then we have the fall. And though that fall created struggle and continues to create struggle, but that set things up so that something else had to happen in the story in order for resolution to come about. And then every good story moves from the conflict to a turning point or a climax. And for us in the gospel, that is our redemption. So our major turning point in the gospel was Jesus coming down to earth and then dying and rising from the dead. So those are our redemptive moments. Those are the things that have been covered by Christ's blood, His atonement, and we are redeemed. And because of that turning point, all of humanity's history was changed. If you want to flip the page then to page 31, every story after the climax has some falling action before it gets to the resolution. Now, falling action for us is our life on earth. In our souls, we know that there is resolution and peace because of the redemption that Christ offered to us by sacrificing himself on the cross and rising again. But we will not see full restoration until we get to heaven. So right now, you and me and everybody walking on the planet, we are walking in the falling action part of the gospel narrative. So everything that happens after the redemption moment is leading the characters and the circumstances to a pleasing final resolution. And that's where we find ourselves living. We have gone through these other parts of the gospel, and here we are. And then the resolution is our restoration in heaven. So the conflict is solved and the character is restored and able to have peace. Now, even while we're living on earth, there are some things that are restored. It's just our full restoration will not be until we get to heaven. So you might experience healing or restoration of relationships or different things that speak to the fact that heaven did come down to earth to bring us those things. It's just that our full final story, the end of our timeline, is going to be in heaven. But there are glimpses of heaven on earth. So there are parts of your story that can and will speak to restoration. And there are parts of your story that will speak to the fall. And there are parts of your story that will speak to redemption. And so we see that throughout our life, the gospel story is interwoven and constantly reworking itself out through the things that we experience. And then that gives us this testimony, this amazing story of who God is, and then points us to where we are headed next and what we can do next. If we are coming out of a point of fallenness and we are restored, does that change our perspective on who God is when we know that without him, we wouldn't have been able to come from that fallenness and move forward? So these categories are what we're going to use with your timeline, and you're going to use some highlighters and really think through what parts, what stones in your story could be connected to these different parts of a story. Now, in a story, these happen very linearly, like as on a line. This happens and then this happens and there might be a flashback and then this happens. Now in your life, it might not be like that. You're not looking for a line of like the story going from one pretty little line to the next. You're really looking for what parts of your story speak to the parts of the gospel narrative, and it probably won't be in order. It will be all over the place, and you're just looking for how can the parts of my story cumulatively speak to the gospel, not as a linear, straight story, because we go forward and backward just like the people of Israel. And God knows that about our story, and he plans that into our lives, and it can be what turns our souls back to him. It also can be what gives us the greatest compassion for those who are experiencing some of the hard things that we've experienced. So you'll see on page 32 just an image. If some of you are more like to learn through images, that's just a way to look at how the plot line and the gospel are similar, that God invented the plot line, and every good story that's come since then follows this same narrative of creation, fall, redemption, falling action, and then restoration. It is built in us to desire that restoration, to be fulfilled and to walk in the restoration of what we know will come in heaven, and we just get glimpses of it here on heaven, or here on earth. So page 33 is going to walk you through. I'm going to kind of overview it, and then you might need to go back and read it step by step of what you're going to do. So it says, after you have exhausted yourself from remembering, writing your stones on your timeline, you're going to go and see which themes, creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, can be used to label some of your stones. You're going to try to categorize all of your stones with at least one of the themes, but each experience you recall doesn't need to have any of the themes or all of the themes. Some of your stones might have more than one color represented because that experience was a testimony to different parts or more than one part of the storyline. So your category is, if you have a yellow highlighter, and I'm going to try and make sure you guys have those, Anything in your life or times when something was made new or birthed or reborn, you're going to highlight in yellow. So anything that happened that's a new creation in you or in your life, maybe you got a degree, maybe you had a baby, maybe you got married, maybe you made a new friend, maybe you started over. Those experiences you're going to, or people or places, you're going to highlight in yellow. Next, you're going to look for memories on your timeline that represent fallenness. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily your own sin. It might, but it could be times when things happen to you that are a result of the fallenness of the world. So times of brokenness, times of things being torn away, times of things being damaged, times of things being lost. And this could be physical, emotional, or spiritual, and you're going to highlight those in green. It could simply be desert times, times where you felt like you couldn't hear from the Lord for a long time. Whatever those are. It could be hardships that are from your choices, or just hardships that are a result of other people's choices in your life. So those you're going to highlight green. Now, if later on in your timeline those are kind of restored, you might end up putting both those colors together. Then you have redemption, and these are memories of times when you witnessed God bringing you or someone else to a turning point. So you're turning away from something that was distracting you, or you're turning away from a destructive behavior. This might be the moment when you first really believed in the Lord, or it just might be times where God really woke you up and said, you're distracted right now, or you're sinning right now, you need to turn from this, or just bad habits that you've gotten into, or just things where you really saw the Lord turn you from going one direction to another. And those you're going to highlight in blue. And then restoration are memories of something in you or around you being made new, healed, or restored. So that can be physical or emotional or spiritual. It could be a relationship that's mended, a vision that's restored, a dream coming to fruition. But anytime, I think a lot of these would be answered prayer moments where you saw the Lord take something maybe from your fall category and really restore it and redeem it and make it new. So the bottom of 33 gives you some tips on how to start kind of wrapping your brain around this. And you can, brainstorm, you can write pictures, you can just start highlighting things and change it if you feel like a different category fits. And then when you feel stuck, if you really are overwhelmed by this whole idea, just stop and pray and ask the Lord to reveal what He wants you to see through this. Because I do think He wants you to see that your story is the gospel story. And because it is the gospel story, there are people who might need to hear it that wouldn't typically maybe listen to the gospel story directly, but they will listen to your story. And so if you can really learn to have your story on the tip of your tongue and have it be tied back to these themes of a good story and the themes of the Bible, whenever you are presented the opportunity to confess or to tell the story of your hope, like it says in 1 Peter, you'll be ready. And that's really what this is about. Maybe you aren't being asked to share your testimony right now, but maybe God is preparing you for somebody's question. And somebody needs to hear how your story has been changed by the gospel, and maybe just in a short little snippet, and maybe it needs to be really specific to a certain promise or a certain character attribute of who the Lord is. And can you take your story and your testimony and share it with them in a way that combines your experience with the Lord with the truth of the gospel? And then secondly, maybe God's just trying to direct your steps in a certain direction, and He's going to use the insight that you get from this to help direct you to the thing that He's asking you to do. Or He might just be affirming you where you are, and by looking back on these things, you can say, I am where I am designed to be, because I can see how God put these things in my story that directed me to where I am right now, and I'm going to praise Him for that, and I'm going to be thankful and joyful for where I am. So that is what you're going to work on for this week and tonight. You're just really looking at all the work you've already done, and then you're highlighting it based on the color that you think represents the theme of what was happening there. And then After you do that, you can go to pages 34 and 35 and just read through those. That's just a closing for the week, and some reminders about why it's important to remember, and then what you can do with those things. And again, you can keep, just like from last week where you were challenged for 5 days to choose a different stone to write a few paragraphs about, you could keep doing that. We're going to get to one of the chapters where you actually do write out your whole, write out one part of your testimony in a way that is related to all of this information. So I challenge you to keep remembering, keep writing things down, and then keep looking for those themes and those categories and asking the Holy Spirit to give you insight and power to see what He's trying to teach you, because He is the most amazing teacher. I am just setting tools in front of you for you to use, to sit with Him, to process and to write things down, because I want to see your life change the generations that are to come based on the people who are already in your life and based on the story that you already have, and just giving you the confidence and the skills to articulate it when you are prompted to by the Spirit. So I pray that you have a great week remembering and recording and writing down. I pray that as you see other stories, even if you go to a movie this week, you'll say, oh, that story followed the same plot line. Exposition, rising action, turning point, falling action, resolution. So have fun with this. Ask God to help you be creative. Enjoy the gifts that He's given, and then believe that what you see here in some way is going to give you vision for the future.